You are invited to imagine, discover, and explore by taking part in STEAMfest 2021, an online event starting January 30th that is free and open to the public. Explore scores of engaging hands-on activities in science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics, including science experiments, art projects, building challenges, outdoor adventures, and live stream events. This year, online activities have been created by students, parents, teachers, and a range of sponsor organizations, including NASA, Google, several popular YouTube creators, businesses, and a number of community organizations. Join us in this family-friendly celebration by sharing on social media and with family, friends, and coworkers, sponsoring or creating activities, and of course, register your children to participate as STEAM explorers.
Greetings, everybody. Lee Blakely here again from STEAMfest Live. I want to welcome you to our daily live stream. This is the third time this week we've been live with you in the afternoon. We're really excited today. We've got a special guest, and before I introduce, I just want to remind everybody that wsteamfest.org has over 100 activities that are fun and free in the areas of science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics. Youth K through 12 can register at wsteamfest.org, complete activities, log into your journal, earn badges, and win prizes. If you enjoy this stream, we'd invite you to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And I apologize, I'm not looking at the camera because I have not our guest presenter today, but I have another guest with us that I'm just gonna bring into sight. For those of you who were with us on Monday, you might recognize Sonny. He insisted on coming back for another show with us today, so he'll be watching throughout the live stream. And I'll put him down. There we go. Oh, he's running off the tape. All right, so now back to the business at hand. Today we have our presenter is C.C. King with the North Carolina Wildlife Resource Commission. The commission and C.C. King has been a sponsor of STEAMfest in the past when we had our in-person event. We were really excited that they could join us again this year with our virtual presentation at wsteamfest.org. I'll actually turn it over to C.C. King because I won't dominate the entire live stream. So thank you, and here we... They just told me that I have your sound muted.
Oh, okay.
Your sound is unmuted now, so I hate to say it, but you may want to start over.
I will. Yeah, sure. Okay, we'll start over. Hey, everyone. My name is Cece King with the Wildlife Resources Commission, and we are here in North Carolina, and you might have seen me do this. I was sharing the logo because we have about 2 million acres in North Carolina that belong to the citizens of North Carolina, where you can go and hunt, fish, trap, and recreate on the land. It is not state park land. There aren't facilities and trails all laid out for you. There are some rugged trails through some of the woods, but mostly this is wild space so that critters have a place to meet, reproduce, find food, water, shelter, and travel from place to place. Being able to connect to each other is really important for their well-being, and also having clean spaces. Maybe a cousin of the critter you just met. This is obviously a little stuffed animal, but do you recognize that voice? Sometimes when they come out, we say, oh, it's spring peepers. But if you listen, I went out today and heard them for the first time. So actually their voices are really different, aren't they? Yeah, this is the spring peeper, and it's misnamed, really. It's a Yankee name. But that's because they start to make noise in the spring up north, but in the south, they make noise in the winter. It's called Pseudochris Crucifer. See the cross on its back? I'm not holding a real one because it really wouldn't like it very much. And their skin is really sensitive as an amphibian, is very pervious, and so they become indicators, harbingers for pollution in the habitat. If you don't hear the sounds of the frogs when spring comes, then you've hit what Rachel Carson called a silent spring. She was referring to the birds, but the frogs are part of that song that we listen for. So when you go out, if you're hearing that sort of sound in your neighborhood, you can know that things are doing pretty well. And so that's great. And you can actually be part of a citizen science program called the Calling Amphibians Survey or Frog Watch. That's a different one, where people do go out and help, and they listen for the frogs, and they start measuring and recording those voices and seeing if there's change over time. If you have interest in that, you can certainly ask later and I'll try to put my email in the chat for you and be happy to give you more information on that. One of the other things we have that helps us get close to these animals, besides their voices and using stuffed animals to represent them, are the skins and the skulls that they leave behind. These animals that we see today in this program have not been killed so that you can see them. They are the remains of animals that were killed in other ways, maybe hit by a car, which is a huge killer of animals out on the highways. You know, sometimes people are like, oh, why do hunters kill animals? But if they could pay attention to how many cars kill animals, then they would see it in perspective. So we have their skins, and these animals really don't want us up close to them when they're alive. So this is a much better way. So I'm going to show you one, and you can put in the chat who you think this is. That would be kind of fun to see if you can make your guesses. But you can see the face is long and the ears are black and the belly is white. So it has counter shading. It has black feet, right? And then a key identifying characteristic is a white tip on its tail. So you can see that the hair is really red and long, that fur. So this is a mammal, and all these hairy mammals have fur, and many of them have under fur and guard hairs on top. So this under fur here is its insulation, and then the long hairs on the top are the guard hairs, and the guard hairs help them shed water or branches maybe as they're moving through the bushes. This particular mammal with its white tipped tail is very common in our fields. It likes what's called early successional habitat, where the trees are not all grown in. It's not a deep forest. It's really where early succession, meaning that pioneer species move in there early, adopters of open space, like a tulip poplar or a I'm trying to think of the other one that has a star-shaped leaf. Anyway, sweet gum, thank you, or sweet gum, they will move out really quickly into a mowed field. And those are pioneer species into the field. So that kind of habitat, not like a golf course, but one that's just trying to hold on to its existence as a field and just starting to grow beyond field, that's called early succession. And there, in those habitats, we find certain species who like it. They prefer the field. And this one is the red fox. And red fox prefers the field. And in the field, it hunts rabbits, voles, moles, as does the red-tailed hawk, which hunts out over the open fields. Quail really like the early successional habitat as well, the bobwhite quail. So you get this guild of species that all like it there. That's their specific habitat, which is different than if you just go through that edge and into the woods, where you're going to find a few different types of species. For example, this one, the red fox, is not even native to where we are here in North Carolina. This species was introduced, we believe, by the British, who brought it over from the UK. The first time you ever met one of these, you might have found it in a storybook, right? About maybe the fox and the hound, and the red fox out maybe getting chickens at someone's farm. But the counterpart that is in North Carolina is the gray fox, which I'm trying to pull up here, what is hiding. And they hide well. They're much more camouflaged. They do have counter shading, just like the red. But so the counter shading means light belly, dark back. So when you look up at that gray fox, if I was looking at the belly of it from the ground, which is what you have here, it's going to be kind of camouflaged with the sky. And then if you're looking down on the gray fox from standing above it, it's going to be more camouflaged with the ground. And here you can see a little bit of red. That's a big indicator. It's not a red fox, but it has a lot of red on it. So you see counter shading and the fox. So one of its adaptations is its ability, of course, to camouflage with its environment. Another one is that it lives in those woods. And the gray fox can, did I call it a gray fox? This is our gray fox. It can climb trees if it's being chased or if it wants food. So it doesn't do it as a natural behavior on a day-to-day basis, but it has the ability, and that's because it has claws that help it do that. It also has, again, a long nose, like the red fox does, not as long as the red fox. And in that area, it gathers a lot of information, right? Just like your dog. And it gathers that information so that it can find prey. I'm trying to pull out an example of that. So in the canine species, like the fox or the coyote, you have that really long snout, right? And so all of this neural area for the sense of smell is dedicated to gathering those scents and bringing that information into the brain, where the canine then determines if that's somebody they want to go after. If you look at this, you can see the eye sockets, I'm going to put it against my shirt, are located here in the front. Now let me show you a different skull and we can compare. So those are eyes in the front. And in this skull, first let's look at it sideways. You can see these are the molars, and there are no canines in this one, as there were here. So sharp, that's better on this side. Sharp canine there, right? And these sharp canines going back. So this one doesn't have those, but it has a lot of molars, which you can see if I turn it sideways. They're fairly sharp looking, but they are double, and they're used for chewing. And you can also see the eye sockets are located much more to the side of the skull. You see that eye socket there. So the phrase that my friend Mike taught me was, eyes on the side hide, eyes in the front hunt. So what does that mean? Mike Campbell was a great educator with the Wildlife Commission for many years, and he taught me that phrase. So eyes on the side, those are prey animals, and they hide from predators. Eyes in the front are hunters. And you, as a human, have eyes in the front as well. So if you take your hand and you put it, your finger, and you close one eye, and you try to reach out and touch something in front of you, like your computer monitor where you're watching or something, you might find it's a little challenging to determine exactly where it is. Whereas if you open both eyes and then you try again, you know precisely where it's located. And that's your depth perception. And that binocular vision, which is what you have because you have those two eyes. If you have two eyes that are both operating, and what a gift if you do, then you can tell exactly where your computer is. Well, the canine here, or the hunter, the predator, they know exactly how much energy they have to put out to jump and grab that prey animal. All right, so what we're talking about today are adaptations. And that's a really important concept that we teach in school. And there are two main categories of adaptations. One is a behavioral adaptation. One is a physical adaptation. So eyes in the front, that's a physical adaptation. To jump and be able to grab prey with your jaw and, bite it, kill it, eat it, that's a behavioral adaptation. The jumping is the behavior. Either one of those, if it helps the animal survive and live and reproduce again and pass on those characteristics, then it is an adaptation. If you happen to be really great at shooting a basketball from one end of the gym all the way and getting it straight through the hoop, that's not necessarily an adaptation. That's not necessarily a trait you could pass on to your offspring. It might be really cool. It might help you win the game. It helps you get points with your friends or whatever it is, right? So it's a good survival trait for you. It gives you a lot of social power, but it's not necessarily something that your child will have. So an adaptation has to be something that passes on. And it typically is a way that the animal adapts, changes to its environment so they're there. All right. So we talked about camouflage, which we saw in the gray fox. Now, here's one that's not using camouflage at all. No. And I really am glad this is a skin, because I don't want to be up close with this one when it's alive and well. So this is the striped skunk. That's exactly right. And our striped skunk is doing just the exact opposite of our fox, right? The skunk, I like to call this sort of like the white belt, because the skunk is saying, get back. I am warning you. I will mess up your day if you come any closer. The skunk doesn't want to bother spraying you. It's going to waste its spray. It really doesn't want to be bothered by you. So it will warn you, just as a biting snake will warn you, especially the venomous snakes like the rattlers. They warn too, because it's about retaining energy. So in the natural world, it's hard to get the resources you need. You got to work and go out and find your food and hunt it down. And if you've ever tried to eat from the natural world only, you may have discovered how difficult it is and gone hungry sometimes trying to eat enough food to live. So birds and animals that have gathered those resources, they don't want to just burn them up unnecessarily. So they will use least force, which is kind of one of our rules of engagement as humans, in fact, in the history of trying to get what we want in terms of resources. We have that same rule. All right, so we've got camouflage. We've got now these bright warning colors. That's another kind of an adaptation. Now here's one that is a physical adaptation. This is another word for it is its morphology. Form reflects its function. A morphology is its shape. Look at the shape of that animal. Ooh. Do you know what that one is? Look at the tail. Just the tail itself. So long. Yeah, that tail is like a rudder on a boat. If you're familiar with that wooden piece that is used to steer a sailboat in the back, a small sailboat. Even large sailboats have rudders. They're just usually underneath and you don't see them. Anyway, this one, if you haven't guessed it already, swims in the river, and that's why it's so long. It helps it give it its shape helps it move more efficiently through the water. It is an otter. The otter's hair is all very close to the same length. We talked about the guard hairs. They're actually longer on a lot of mammals. And then the fur underneath, the underfur is shorter. And in the otter, it also has underfur and guard hairs, but the guard hairs are all about the same length. It's just moving through water. So again, it's about the physics of moving through water instead of moving through bushes. Also, they need to swim very quickly. Their hair, if you could feel it, this is incredibly soft. Two things make it really soft: that all the hair is the same length. If you've ever had a friend shave their head but leave about a 1/4 inch of hair on there, or if you just have a friend who keeps their hair cropped very short to their head, and it's kind of soft, right, when you feel it. Well, that's the same effect here. With all the hairs the same length, it's incredibly soft. And then also, the density per square inch, I mean, in that area of the otter, the number of hairs is extremely high. And so, again, it's going to be insulated very well because of that, how much hair it has on it. And it's going to stay warmer, which it needs to do, right? It needs to be insulated in the water. Otherwise, it gets hypothermic. You can't stay in the water for a long amount of time because your body temperature drops. So the otter is trying to keep its body temperature up. And that's why it has to have all that hair, as well as layers of fat and so forth. They're also very aggressive. I have a skull of an otter here. I'll show you that one. The otter has a very flat head, as you can see. The eyes are located really close to the top of the skull. So when it's moving through the water, it can hunt and be very stealthy. It also has some pretty significant teeth on it, as you can see, and eyes in the front again, because it's a hunter. So the flat skull, which is pretty interesting to look at. Now it has a shorter snout. It's not using its sense of smell, is it? Not as much. So the cranium, the shape of the skull, tells you which senses it's using more. It's using its eyes even more. And then the size of this cavity, the brain cavity for the animal, often reflects, again, an intelligence level as how much capacity they're using, how much of their skull is dedicated to thinking about that input that's coming from all the senses, whether it's hearing or sight or smell, and processing all of that, or whether a larger part of it is just dedicated to, no, I'm just going to smell and run, smell and attack. And so looking at different skulls gives you a kind of a cool take on that. For example, I'm not sure beaver has as much cranial cavity dedicated to processing information as it has mouth area and skull area dedicated to dealing with its environment. I mean, the size of its skull is mostly dedicated to that jaw and those teeth. This is a very large skull. Look at the size of my hand. I mean, if you didn't have anything to compare it to, you might think it was a mouse because it looks very similar to a mouse and in that family. Again, the eyes are right on the top, again, so that they can see and stay hidden in the water at the same time, say under the surface. And these teeth are pretty interesting because they grow constantly. And you may have a guinea pig or a hamster at home, and that animal has the same skill as this one, or the same, physical adaptation and physical trait, which is that the back of the teeth are softer than the front of the teeth. The orange is a harder surface than the back. And so every time the animal takes a bite, it's more likely that the back of the tooth will break off than the front. And so it is essentially sharpening its own teeth and slowly breaking them off with every bite that it takes when it's chewing away at the bark of trees. And it chews the bark away not because it's eating the bark, but because it wants to get to the layer under the bark, which is the cambium. And that's where the xylem and the phloem come and go for the tree, bringing in nutrients and taking out. And that rich, soft underbark is actually what the cambium layer is, what the beaver is going for. And they're, of course, also girdling the tree, which essentially strangles the tree. It can't get its nutrients up its bole, its trunk, to its leaves anymore. And so the tree dies and falls. And then that stops the water, which creates a big pooled area. Depends on where you are, how big it is. But that swamp or wetland area that the beaver creates makes it a lot harder for predators to get to their kits, the babies. The beaver baby is a kit, which is going to live in a lodge in the middle of that water area, away from the edge. So the fox is running around the outside going, doggone it, I can't get to that lodge. So the beaver builds a lodge and a dam. The dam stops the water when the trees all fall, and the water backs up because it can't flow in its typical route, and it spills over the edges, and then it creates this big wetland area where the beavers survive. And then they move on, and some landowners go, "Dadgummit, those beavers," because it really drives them crazy sometimes. All right, so we have another kind of camouflage, which is pretty neat to see. If you're walking through the woods and you look up and you see a speckled belly, stop and know that it's a miracle, because seeing this animal in the woods is a rare experience. This animal does not want to be seen. These speckles are supposed to kind of look, we think they're an adaptation to camouflage in with the leaves so that it looks like the sky behind you and some leaves. Do you know whose belly this is? This is the belly of an animal with a lot of spots, but again, it has that sort of darker stripe down where the spinal cord is. You'll see that in a lot of animals. It's related to its thermoregulation, its body temperature. It also has we call it a key identifying trait, or a field trait, field mark. It has a very short tail, a little bobbed tail. That's the hint. So, last but not least, it has a rather short snout. It doesn't have a lot of surface area for smell. It has more surface area for its eyes. And this is a native North Carolina animal. Can you see its face? And if you were in the classroom with me, you'd all be guessing. It has out loud and telling me, I already know what it is. Stop describing it. I've already guessed it 10 minutes ago. All right. I can't pull up that little ear. Their ears are a little dry. This is a bobcat. One thing that's really fun with skulls is the more time you spend with them, the easier it is to go, oh, I totally see the bobcat. I can see that straight face. I can see those teeth. I can visualize and imagine that skull having a skin on it, and that skull being a cat. It's very cat-like, and that's because of its short snout. So going back again to a canine, this is the coyote. There's no way this is a coyote, is it? There's no way that's even in the dog family at all. And also, the otter, see that flat skull? This is definitely not a swimmer. Yeah, eyes on the side again. Eyes in the front again, excuse me. So if you aren't sure about whether it's an omnivore, herbivore, or carnivore, just take a look at the teeth. So those two really sharp teeth right there, obviously those are used to penetrate into the prey and kill prey. And you can see that there are sharp teeth all the way down. So all those, in the dog is a canid, right? And they have canines, and those are the teeth that are sharp, and they're for ripping meat. You can use your tongue, not your fingers in your mouth, but your tongue, and you have canines. And if you're younger than I am, your canines are hopefully still sharp. Mine, when I rub them with my tongue, are not as sharp as they probably used to be. You also have incisors in the front, which if I bite my tongue with my front teeth, I can't talk anymore. You can't talk. Those are the incisors. They're the scissors. They're for biting, and this animal has some as well. You see about 6 across the front, right? And so they slice, and then of course you have molars in the back, and those which we saw on the deer are for grinding. You can feel those with your tongue as well. And the molars are, in terms of grinding, they're good for chewing up herbivorous things and also reprocessing our food. If processing it further, the cat doesn't have those. The cat slices, chews, and swallows chunks of meat, and it's purely carnivorous, a pure meat eater. Whereas you can eat both. You might not eat meat. It might be a personal choice that you make. But if I look at your teeth, I can see that you have the capacity, your body has the physiological ability to process meat and vegetables. And that makes you an omnivore as opposed to a carnivore. And likewise, an herbivore does not have any of those teeth that are used for ripping meat. It only has the grinders, and it has some incisors on the bottom. This one does. I don't have that. On the top, it doesn't even have any incisors. It's just like a deer and a goat. They both just rip with the bottom incisors in the front, and they pull on the leaves. And likewise, the beaver. Did you notice? The beaver does not have any canines, does it? It just has incredible incisors and its molars in the back. Yeah. So it's going to be an herbivore, just like the deer. So herbivore, carnivore, and omnivore. Now, you might have just learned those when you were younger. You're like, I already know what those mean. That's great, but you can learn a lot more about each specific species that fall into those categories as you watch them. Like a coyote, even though it's a canid and it's canines and is classified as a carnivore, coyotes are incredibly adaptive. In fact, they're probably the most adaptive creatures in North Carolina, at least that I know of. Maybe not in the bug family. Maybe maggots are more adaptive, or some of these other like incredibly rugged little creatures. But when it comes to mammals, I think coyote might win when it comes to mammals. Now, black bear is very adaptive as well, and they're native. Coyote is not native to North Carolina. They have moved in. They were brought in by people, and then they got out and got free because they're wily. And they also, we think, actually migrated from the west, where they are native, over the Mississippi River drainage, even into Canada, and south again to the east of the Mississippi. A coyote, like the gray fox, has a lot of camouflage to it. It also has, you might remember the name of it, counter shading, which is the light underbelly and the dark back, sorry. They can live in cities. They can live in your garage. They can hunt in a pack. They can hunt by themselves. They can eat garbage. If a coyote is a nuisance, and no, if that's not what I meant to say, actually. If a coyote is killed by someone because they think it might be threatening their calves or their cat or something, but it hasn't been threatening them, you can actually get rid of a useful coyote by not knowing it well enough, and you can make room in the habitat for a nuisance coyote who will kill cats and calves and other things, or threaten a kid on a swing. So if a coyote is staying in the woods, staying out of sight, not making itself too boldly present in your home, your yard, or your community, if you can just hear it calling with its friends off in the distance, that coyote is doing what it's supposed to do. It's living as a coyote, and there's no way to get rid of coyotes in North Carolina or in the habitats where they have established themselves. Because if you take a coyote, which some people do because they're afraid of them, and they are ubiquitous and abundant, and those are great words to describe wildlife, whether there are enough of them, if they're rare or endangered, or if they're just everywhere and there are tons of them. Everywhere, they're ubiquitous, tons of them, they're abundant. Coyotes are both ubiquitous and abundant, and I lost my train of thought. But if you kill one, you can make a space for a nuisance coyote to move in. So if they're off in the woods doing their thing, leave them alone. They have filled that niche. There's nothing we can do to get rid of them. If you kill one, they're just going to reproduce and make a bunch more to respond. Yeah. So that's another adaptation that they have. So the best thing is to leave them be. And that's the best thing with all wildlife, is wildlife wants to be wild out in the woods. It really doesn't want to interact with us. So the best thing we can do is make sure they have a space to be wild, to create habitat, restore habitat, or at least leave habitat for them. And the key place to do that, again, I live in North Carolina, I focus on North Carolina, is along our rivers and waterways. So along our rivers, if we can leave buffers on either side, we can leave woods and shrubbery and native plants where the animals can move. That will be their highway. The riparian corridor is their highway along the rivers. That's what you call it, the riparian area. That's the area along rivers. That area is what wildlife use to get from place to place and to interact with each other. They, of course, go there because they have to have water, food, water, shelter, right, as a part of habitat. And so that's a really, really important habitat place. So all that you can do, whether you join your local stream watch group or become involved with other citizen science projects, you can also use iNaturalist, an incredible tool. It's an app, and you can take pictures of the bugs and the trees and things that are around you. And this app will tell you what you're looking at. So you might take a picture of a plant. You have no idea what it is, but you've seen it on your property and you want to know, is this an invasive plant that shouldn't even be here? Should I try to take it out? Is it poison ivy? If I touch it, am I going to get in trouble? And you'll take a picture, and if you don't know what it is, you can actually ask other people in the community on the app to help identify it, and it'll send you suggestions. The app has an AI in it, so it immediately will start recognizing through that artificial intelligence, and then after that, real people that are experts will also weigh in and let you know. So we've talked a lot about different adaptations. I just kind of want to review what some of those are. We've got the camouflage we talked about, the waterproof fur, the dense fur. We didn't talk about temporal adaptations. So I should mention that, which is time. So some animals are adapted for some times versus others. So we talked about color, being able to see in different light during the day. But what about being nocturnal or diurnal or crepuscular? Those are 3 other ways that you can really adapt as a temporal adaptation. I'm looking for one of our diurnal or crepuscular. This one is a somewhat crepuscular or diurnal. And sometimes I'm not really sure which one it is, to be perfectly honest, but I would bet they're crepuscular. I can tell you they feed their babies on a crepuscular schedule. So that's kind of interesting, which is dawn and dusk. So a mother rabbit will leave the babies in the nest and go away. So she's not giving away the hiding place. So it's very natural and normal to not see the rabbits with their babies throughout the day. She has not abandoned them. In fact, she's trying very hard not to give away where they are. And then she'll go back at dawn and at dusk and feed them. So that is what crepuscular means. And I think it's a great word. It's a good chewy word to say, isn't it? This is the beaver, and it also tends to be crepuscular, and it has some really cool behavioral adaptations, like slapping its tail to give a warning that they see someone or hear someone in the area. And they're very fun to go watch. If you sit very quietly and you let things get back to nature's pace and you don't move, that's when you're going to start to observe wildlife. You have to hold so still for so long that they kind of forget you're there, or they just stop worrying about you because you just haven't moved. And that's what hunters do. They go in there at 3:30 in the morning and they wait for a few hours, very still and very quiet, until they can feed their families. And they only feed their families with animals that are ubiquitous and abundant. And one of the things that taking some of the deer out of the habitat does, besides feeding someone's family, is it also helps make the herd stronger. The hunter becomes just like a coyote or a wolf in there, and they help balance the whole cycle and the whole web of life that's living in that habitat. If you live in a suburb or in a city area, or if you live in a place where you've seen deer hit by cars, that's because there are a lot of deer. And in places where deer have a lot of woods to run around, you don't see them hit by cars that much. In the cities and in the suburbs, you're not allowed to shoot guns, and so you can't take a deer. But a deer is no problem walking into a suburban neighborhood and eating all the shrubbery and all the garden plants and everything else that are growing in people's yards. So they set up home, and sometimes people are not really happy about that. They would like the deer to not be there. So sometimes hunters do go in and help. In that situation, there's something called Hunters for the Hungry, where they will come in and they will take a few deer and then they take them to people that really need food. So I find that is a really sustainable way, if you eat meat, to eat meat, because they are living a free and good life all the way up until that moment. They're not kept in a confined feeding area or anything like that. And those people are the ones that really support our work. So because of the hunters and anglers in North Carolina, we can pay biologists to go out and count species and find out, how are the bobcats doing? How are the raccoons doing? By the way, the raccoons are doing just fine. How about our bats? They're not doing so well. So together with biologists, citizens like you can do citizen science and research and work. You can volunteer and do that. You can get internships over time, and people will mentor you. There's a lot of ways to get involved. You have to remember, if you love wild animals, they don't have any money in their pockets to pay you to work for them. So you have to either work for the government like I do. I work for state government. I'm an educator. We also have people that do land management, like they like working on a bulldozer or doing prescribed fire and burning down the forest just to the point where there's early successional habitat, like we talked about earlier, so that we can have all the different kinds of species, because diversity is strength. That's really important with us as humans, and it's really important in the natural world. So we have to have different types of habitat: the forest, the field, the wetland areas, the vernal pools, the flowing mountain streams, all of it brings all that diversity to us. One of the things I want you to know about North Carolina that makes it incredibly special in the world in terms of diversity is that we have more salamanders in North Carolina by species than anywhere. We are a salamander hotspot, and it has to do with our geological history and the Appalachian orogeny and them being trapped by these mountains, this mountain forming event. And by the time you get to 8th grade, if you've already done it, maybe you have, you'll start learning about mountain building and how the Appalachian mountain chain used to be taller than the Himalayas. And over time and over many geologic events, it is worn down. So it's one of the most ancient mountain chains in the world. And in all of that mountain building, the salamanders got stuck in between the ridges, and they diversified and adapted. And there are many, many, many different species of salamanders now, 60 plus in North Carolina, that live in all different kinds of habitats. So they're really cool, and they are silent, and they have, as amphibians, pervious skin. So they're super sensitive to changes in the habitat. And again, then they serve as indicator species of our well-being and our health. So I have talked and talked and talked, and I would love to hear some questions from anyone in the audience and what's come up for you. And I would gonna keep an eye on my chat to see if anything's come through. But I want to remind you, if you came late, to be sure to start going out and listening for the sounds of the frogs. And if you happen to have upland habitat where some, in the wintertime, some gullies and deep spots fill with water, those might be vernal pools. Vernal means spring. And the vernal pools, they fill up with water in the winter, so there are no fish in there. And they are perfect places to lay your eggs if you're a salamander. And right now, I'm waiting for the first warm, rainy nights of February, because around here, the spotted salamanders and the marbled salamanders, which are fossorial, meaning they live underground almost all year, they wait for that same night, and they come out. They call it big night, and they travel many yards from their migration spot down to the pond where their parents laid their eggs, and they have a congress, and they swim around, and the males nudge the females, and they lay eggs, they fertilize the eggs, all on that big night, and then they leave shortly thereafter and move back to their underground home where they stay for the whole rest of the year until the whole cycle starts again. So on the first warm, rainy nights in February, try not to drive your car. Because you'll see in February, you'll start seeing frogs on the road. You'll be like, what is this? The invasion of the frogs. And it's like, no, no, no. It's a warm, rainy night. And the frogs are out and they're calling. And the salamanders are traveling across the roads. And it's so dangerous because we haven't built overpasses and underpasses on all of our roads. So our animals can have their traveling paths as well. And there's no way to communicate to a salamander, could you just like move the family? Because they can't move. They're just going to do what they've always done. They're going to return to that same vernal pool, that very special place.
Wow, that's amazing. We're all going to be watching over the next 2-3 weeks to see that night happen.
Absolutely.
I want to thank you. I've been sitting here just rapt listening to your presentation. We've got a couple of questions out there, I think. I'm gonna let Shannon and Lena share those if they'd like.
Looks like we had a question on the app. That's iNaturalist.
Yeah.
And I put it in the chat. I'm hoping it's in there, but it's iNaturalist. It's lowercase I Naturalist.
Correct. It's a lowercase I and a capital N if you care, but yeah.
And you were holding up an otter skin. I had a question. When you were talking about it, I was going, that's either an otter or a muskrat. So what's the difference between an otter and a muskrat?
That is a great question. A muskrat looks a bit more like a beaver, really. And here is a muskrat skin. So you can just see in terms of their shape and their size, they're very different. They both live in aquatic habitats. They hunt very different things. So the muskrat's in Rodentia, family Rodentia, and it is a rodent, and it's going to eat. It's very herbivorous, they're pretty abundant, actually. I see them even in my suburban habitats, whereas the otter is more in the river and not as much like in ponds and in slower water, and it's going to be eating bivalves. So it'll be eating mussels and clams, and it is very assertive hunting technique. So they're really, really different from each other. Whereas muskrat, not to be confused with a nutria, they are in more marshy kinds of habitats. They're also in the rivers too.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So I have a follow-up. What's the difference between a possum and an opossum? And what do we have here in North Carolina?
I think that's a trick question, everyone. Oh, goodness. Right. It has to be where you're from, right? Yeah, the difference is where you're from. So,
Okay.
yeah. And but the Virginia opossum is a North Carolina creature, and I don't have a possum here with me, but they I said that coyote was the most adaptive mammal. It's probably the most adaptive, but it doesn't have the most adaptations. So there's a difference. So a coyote can live in a ton of different habitats, but if you look at adaptations, that opossum is phenomenal. It's totally unique, right? It's our only marsupial in North America, which means it has a baby in a pouch, and then they crawl onto its back. So if you see one that's killed on the road and you feel so moved, you can look and see if there's any babies and give those to a wildlife rehabilitator. Remember, I said animals don't have any money to pay? Those rehabilitators are volunteers. So unless you're saving land through a land conservancy or working for the government or working as a veterinarian, those are the people, those are the paying jobs for animals, but you can volunteer and save them. So a possum, prehensile tail, it can move its tail around and grab onto a branch. It will hang upside down by that tail when it's young. It can't hold itself up when it's older. It's too big and heavy, but it can, because it doesn't have any fur in its tail, and go out on a branch and hold on, and other critter might just walk right over the top of it. It has projectile vomit, and it eats lots of dead things. That's pretty necrotic, so it smells terrible. It has very sharp teeth and it'll hiss at you, but it is also incredibly smart. They make great pets, but you can't make it a pet because it's not legal. But they're really easily adapted to humans. So they don't mind coming in and eating out of your garbage or in your garage, but they also have myotonia, which is what Tennessee fainting goats have, which means that their brain's autonomic nervous system sends a message to their body to just freeze if they're scared. Nobody respects that. So you're going like, hey, get out of my garage. And it's going, I'd love to, but I can't move. So don't freak it out. Just let it go and it will paddle on out of your garage. But they've been here for a really, really long time, evolutionarily speaking. And they're just a remarkable, remarkable species. Everybody loves a possum that knows wildlife. Yep.
Cece, we have a question.
Yeah.
Since they live in the water, do otters and beavers have oily skin?
They do indeed. Yep, they do indeed. In fact, I think the beavers have an oil gland, if I'm correct. And but y'all can Google that and find out a ton more about it. But they certainly do have a lot of oil in their fur. Yep.
And Cece, a lot of us live or around this area, live on Lake Norman. So we do see a lot of muskrat, and we do see them eating the clamshells.
Okay, well, I may have misspoken then. So I apologize, and now I'm going to have to do some more research. That's great. Thank you.
Yeah, they tend to be a nuisance sometimes, but a pleasant nuisance.
So I'll just mention, you mentioned Land Conservancy.
Yeah.
One of the sponsors of Steamfest is the Davidson Land Conservancy.
Oh, great.
They've been a sponsor for 4 Steamfest events now.
Oh, yeah, Davidson Land Conservancy. That's great.
We're big fans of what they do. The Davidson area is fortunate to have extensive greenways and parks and so forth. A big part of that has been the Davidson Land Conservancy's efforts. Other questions?
All those are coming in. The greenway is what we were talking about. That's another kind of corridor for animals. It's when humans set them aside. If humans aren't there and you're a nocturnal animal and humans have gone back to their houses, then it's safe again for you to travel down that greenway and get from place to place so you can intersperse with other creatures of your kind and you're not stuck with one little group. And I don't know a lot about muskrats, so now I'm challenged to go learn more. I'm glad. Were there other questions?
Well, I had another follow-up on the salamander. Where are the best places to go salamander hunting? And especially in North Carolina, you've got some good spots for us.
So I would say the best thing is to ask your local parks and if they have seen them and if they have programs. One of the things we don't want to do is go disturb a lot of salamander or amphibian and reptile habitat. Uh, so it's great when they do have programs and they're willing to go out and if they have cover boards and where they can show you. But in terms of the fossorial ones that I mentioned, a vernal pool would be the place to look for them. And those are often on these land conservancies. You'll find, I would ask your land conservancy as well, because they're setting aside really sensitive habitat, and those vernal pools are part of sensitive habitat often. I don't know if that's sure that's helpful, but yeah.
So I saw a question, and I had the same question. The I think you called it counter shading. Is that right? The difference in the color on the top and the bottom.
Yeah.
I understand the color on the top to like camouflage, but why the lighter color on the bottom?
Yeah. Well, I'm only repeating what I've been taught, and an animal didn't teach me this, and I didn't discover it for myself through my field observations, which is the strongest way to make a case. But what's been told to me is that it helps to camouflage against the sky above. So sitting behind you in your office, I see an orca, and the same explanation has been given for the orca, which is if you look at that whale, the bottom is light and it camouflages against the sky. And the top, when you look down, it camouflages against the water. So I'm not sure if that answered that question, but that's what the current thinking is, as far as I know, in terms of counter shading and why it exists.
It does. That's very, very interesting. All right. We're coming up on an hour here. Okay. So I don't want to monopolize your time any more than we already have. We've been very fortunate to have you here today. I do want to make one last check and see if there were any questions that we didn't get to. No?
No more questions.
Okay. All right. So
thank you so much, Lee. It's been a real pleasure, and thank you, everyone.
It's been a pleasure for us also. And I'll just wrap us up here. Let's see. There we go. All right. So I want to thank everybody for attending our live stream today. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe to our channel. If you've registered at SteamFest, then you can go and answer the journal questions related to this live stream, qualify for the daily prizes. If you've not registered, then you should go and register. It's completely free, and you can try out any and all of our activities. We've got live streams almost every day for the next 10 days, and we're really looking forward to having you join us and continue the SteamFest. And again, thanks to C.C. King and the North Carolina Wildlife Commission.